Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome you to my apologies, to our program this evening, the first program of the 2024 Judah Toro program series. My name is Rachel King. I'm honored to be a new trustee of the Toro Synagogue Foundation and a member of its education committee. And it's in that role that I will be your moderator this evening. We are excited to hear tonight from Emily Colbert-Cairns about the roots of Converso identity during the Spanish Inquisition, and specifically the centrality of the biblical Queen Esther for both crypto-Jews and Catholics during that time period. Before we get started, I'd like to just cover some housekeeping notes for this webinar. Please keep yourself on mute during the presentation and have your camera off. We will accept questions via the chat function. These can be directed to me, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can at the end of Emily's presentation. I also want to mention that our topic for this spring series is Conversos and Hidden Identity. So I want to let you know that the next Judah Toro program series event is on Thursday, May 9th, when Jeannie Milgram will discuss her book, My 13 Grandmothers, which is about her extraordinary journey as a Catholic born and raised in Cuba, who discovered her roots as a Sephardic Jew through some extraordinary genealogy and ultimately reclaimed her Jewish identity. So now on to the main event. I am so pleased to introduce our presenter, Emily Colbert-Cairns. Emily is an associate professor of Spanish at Salve Regina University. She specializes in gender and converso and crypto-Jewish identity in the early modern period. She is the author of the 2017 book, Esther in Early Modern Iberia and the Sephardic Diaspora, Queen of the Conversas, which is her topic tonight. She has also published in several journals and is co-editor of Confined Women, The Walls of Female Space in Early Modern Spain, published in 2020, and the co-editor of the forthcoming volume, Early Modern Maternities in the Iberian Atlantic, surprisingly relatable, Early Modern Maternities in the Iberian Atlantic. And she is currently working on a new book, Medieval Mamas, Surprisingly Relatable Nipple Tales, which is under consideration with the University of Delaware Press. In addition to her scholarly work, Emily is a Toro Synagogue Foundation board member and serves as chair of the Education Committee. She has been instrumental in helping launch the 360 virtual tour on the Toro Synagogue website and in engaging dynamic program speakers. Tonight, she is our dynamic program speaker. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just share my screen as I begin. And I'd like to thank the committee and the Toro Foundation for inviting me and to kick off our series this spring. I'm hoping to add some new ideas to how we think about Purim and its heroine, Esther. Like so many Jewish girls, at age 8, I dressed up as Queen Esther for Purim. Beautiful and heroic, she was the obvious choice, just edging out of the Hamantashen outfit I was sporting the year before. Even at that young age, thanks to our Sunday morning classes, we all knew that she saved the Jewish people. Who wouldn't want to be like Esther? Esther has remained an inspiring figure for me today. And while a minor figure for mainstream Jews and Christians, her cameo role at Purim is a mere hint at the far richer and more prominent place she has held for marginalized Jewish women over many centuries. A hopeful figure at times of mortal danger, the same women who passed furtive notes inscribed in avocado and banana skins while held by the Inquisition made novel practice to venerate her, And I will be discussing tonight the Inquisition trials of two crypto or secret Jewish women. And to reiterate a plug for our the rest of our spring series, Jeannie Milgram will also be addressing her crypto Jewish roots. As Rachel said, my recent book, Esther in Early Modern Iberia and the Sephardic Diaspora, tells the story of Esther in both inquisitorial Iberia and throughout the Sephardic diaspora in this period, roughly 15 to 1700s. In other words, I explore the texts that were produced from both a Christian and Jewish perspective. I focus on these various Esther texts through a gendered lens, and I explore the idea of the feminization of impurity in an Iberian, Spanish, or Portuguese context. Women were considered the bearers, literally, of impurity through childbirth. This impure blood, i.e. Jewish and Muslim, was passed down to their children. At the same time, women's bodies, regardless of their confessional identity, preserved their husbands' and families' honor by being pure. Today, I'm going to focus on two sets of works. The 16th century tapestry series, Esther and Asueros, held within the cathedral in Zaragoza, Spain. I visited these tapestry series a few summers ago, and it was really awesome. These tapestries reflect the Christian perspective. I also worked with the original and unpublished Inquisition trials of Isabel and Leonor de Carvajal, housed in Berkeley, California, to explore the Jewish perspective. These crypto or secret Judaizers perished in their second inquisitorial trial in New Spain in 1595, and it lasted until 1596. And so I chose these two sets of text. The tapestries to reflect a Christian perspective held in Zaragoza, Spain, Esther and Asueros. And I also working with the original and unpublished Inquisition trials of Isabel and Leonor de Carvajal, housed in Berkeley, California, to explore a Jewish perspective. These crypto or secret Judaizers perished in their second trial in 1595 to 1596. I specifically chose these two sets of texts because they both have visual components that I can share with you today, and they reflect a hybrid lens that is central in my work, i.e., they mix elements of Christianity and Judaism. They live in two worlds, and this is something that's very present for Conversas. I don't have time to discuss all the retellings in my book, but I am happy to discuss further in the Q&A some of the other texts. In my book, I discuss Golden Age writer Lope de Vega's play, The Beautiful Esther, from the same period, Felipe Godinez's Queen Esther play, and Haman and Mardochio, another play that he wrote. And interestingly, he wrote these on either side of his Inquisition trial held in Sevilla. And the poem of the Queen Esther by João Pinto Delgado from the Amsterdam community of the Portuguese nations. I also, as we have a wider audience, I've invited my students to come, and there's other people around. Before getting into the nitty-gritty, I just wanted to give a brief recap of the story of Purim, which is about to be celebrated in the coming days on March 23rd to 25th. The story of Esther takes place in the Persian Empire, where the king Asueros' wife doesn't obey his wishes, and he banishes her from the land. He has a beauty contest to see who will become the new queen, and Esther participates, and she becomes queen, all the while hiding her identity, her Jewish identity. When the king's evil advisor Haman attempts to kill all the Jewish people, she reveals her Jewish background, and importantly does a 3-day fast before approaching the king, because approaching the king, you could be punished by death. So she risks her life, approaches the king, and emerges victorious and saves the Jewish people. The way we celebrate it in many normative Jewish communities and today is through a carnival, a big feast, costumes, games. It's a celebration. Kids run around during the service when we read from the book of Esther with noisemakers and saying boo. And Haman, we eat hamantaschen that reflect his hat, the triangular hat. And this is how we interact with Purim today. For those of you who do celebrate Purim, I would ask you to think about how you interact with this story each year and how you were taught it as a young child, and teach it to your children. For me, it was a story where I celebrated a young and beautiful queen. Esther won a beauty contest, And when asked not to reveal her background in order to save the Jews, I accepted this fact. This aspect of hiding one's identity comes to be a crucial aspect for Jewish conversos. It is what I argue makes her queen of the conversos. Let me first start by addressing the early modern Iberian Christian perspective of this figure. So in this Jewish story of triumph, why was Esther and her story retold by Christians in the Tapestry series? The story of Esther was used to construct a narrative of a strong empire in 16th century Spain. And we're talking about the Spanish Holy Roman Empire at its height. This colonial period was very strong, and the transatlantic empire was a real important piece in the world. They retell the Esther story and uphold the idea that she is a beautiful heroine, but crucially, she is not a transgressive underdog. Instead, she upholds contemporary gender norms of female behavior. Let me set this scene, and I would like to show you this following image. This is Saragossa. This is the central plaza where the cathedral is, and you can see on the left side the parades and during Holy Week, and the cathedral is where the Esther tapestries were displayed at this time on the walls of the cathedral, and it was a really popular place then, and it's a really popular place now. The stunning tapestries, and we're going to look at them in just a moment, embroidered in gold and silk thread, were hung outside the walls of the cathedral every Holy Week from mid-April for over 500 years, which in the early modern period was far more important than Christmas. These Holy Week celebrations lasted for about a week. People danced in the streets, and there were elaborate parades. They were exposed to the elements, and in this architecturally stunning central Plaza Zaragoza, which remains to this day the epicenter of public discourse. People, rich and poor, would have been out celebrating throughout the week and out in mass. This massive festival would have encouraged people hustling around. Birds would be flying. You get the idea. And this tapestry series is in 3 panels, and I'm just going to go through them briefly, and we can always come back to any questions. The tapestry served as a type of Bible for the majority illiterate population. Noteworthy, the size of the figures in this panel are so large as to appear lifelike. And so when you approach it, it's massive. To the public who was and still is allowed to approach the panels. Today, visitors can see these 3 panels in the museum held within the cathedral, and I really definitely recommend a visit. In the first scene, the king, and he appears twice. You can see him on the left at the center of the table, or a little bit right of center on the throne, is in private place, eating an opulent meal, surrounded by members of the court. And I'm just going to zoom in on that image. So this is the first detail, the banquet detail. The king is surrounded by members of court and has numerous servants, each serving a particular function. There are wine bearers, meat carvers. It is a feast. And the king is at the height of his power. As we can see in his commanding gesture, he is holding a scepter in his left hand and pointing at the carefully differentiated spices. The emphasis in this first panel is to show the king's majesty. He must demonstrate the vastness and power of his empire. On the right side, and if we go back to the full panel here, he banishes Vashti, and you can see Vashti at the bottom of the tapestry, and she is being escorted out of the court. He banishes Vashti, his first wife, and shows the bitter fate of those who do not comply with his rule. And so this is setting up the story. Okay, I'm going to move now to the second panel. As these tapestries were crafted in Belgium, part of the Spanish Empire at the time, we can see the Dutch architecture and not the Spanish. If you look at the tops of the buildings and the colors, the use of colors that were found in this more northern city and place. Esther appears in the second panel And you can see her in the center. She appears twice, in the very center bottom and on the right, sitting on the throne with the king. It is critical here what is omitted, i.e. the fast of Esther. For Conversas, this fast was of central importance. Here, what is key in the series is feasting. It is important to note that Esther is featured below Asueros. Showing her obedience is an important theme in this work, and she's below him in the center panel. This moment is revealing because Esther is presented undeniably not as a strident protagonist, but demure and clearly inferior, literally a supplicant at his feet. Even though this story is about the action of the central figure, the most amount of space is given to the king in his redolent splendor. The message is clear. The king is the source of power. This is the detail panel where she is below the king. And then as we move to this third panel, we also see Esther being celebrated on the throne. Okay. The tapestries create a living narrative between today and 500 years ago in Zaragoza. The aspects of everyday life are presented to allow the audience to see their own personal connections within the main biblical text. They were viewed by men and women, clergy, elite, and common people alike. For common people, they were a type of spiritual advisor. For the elite, they were aspirational, as well as a showpiece crafted over many months with gold and silk thread. They were highly sought after in this pan-European collection. They were intended to wow the viewer. If you find yourselves in Spain, I definitely recommend a visit to Zaragoza and to the Museo del Aseo. I would now like to move to the second set of texts, the Carvajal sisters. As seen in their 1595 to 96 inquisitorial trial, Esther stood out as a key figure for Isabel and Leonor de Carvajal, two sisters who lived public lives as Catholics and private lives as Jewish conversos within a large network of family and friends. They were imprisoned twice by the Inquisition and ultimately killed in an auto de fe after the second trial. They would pass notes back and forth between each other while held in jail cells on what they had accessible, banana peels and avocado skins. And you can see in this, these are actually notes that they passed between each other that were, it was kind of, the Inquisitors knew about it and they encouraged it because they got more information. So they were kept as evidence. And on the right side, you see Isabel half naked in front of the Inquisitors and on trial. To define the term converso, I know I've been using it, it's a converted Jew to Catholicism. The first mass pogroms in Spain occurred in 1391, and for the first time, Jews and converted Jews, conversos, lived side by side. There was also a distinction between true and false converts, true being those who converted and lived Catholic lives, and false converts lived in public Catholic lives, but in private Jewish lives. 1492 brought the expulsion, and the normative Jewish practicing Jews were no longer allowed to stay within the peninsula. Flexibility was crucial to the Carvajal's survival and practice in a world that was both hybrid and dramatically unaccommodating. Esther is adaptable, not only for survival, but ultimately for success. For these Carvajal sisters, who lived double lives as public Christians and private Jews, Esther, who passed in the majority Persian society and became queen while keeping her religious identity secret, deeply resonated with them. And this is a picture of the actual manuscript that's housed in Berkeley today. It's a leather-bound book. It's a very complete manuscript. It has over 400 pages of testimony from the families and friends. We read in this trial how these crypto-Jews negotiated two identities within the space of their home. And the space of the home is really important because it's a female space. The public spaces like synagogues were no longer allowed to function. And so the home space becomes really important. And I'm going to quote from this trial, which is a very complete document, as I said, except for the odd wormhole. And you can actually see where worms have gone through the paper. So it's written, there was an altar in the main room of the house that had some images that she used to trick those who entered. Sometimes she would kneel in front of the images to make it seem to the servants that she was Spanish, i.e. Christian. And my mother had a rosary that she would hold in her hands and bring to Mass, although she would never pray with it, nor would she entrust herself to Jesus Christ, nor his Blessed Mother, but instead they were used to maintain appearances. I reimagine the Carvajal sisters as leaders of their faith. Most historians have been primarily interested in their brother, Luis de Carvajal, who called himself a martyr in his second inquisitorial trial, and in his autobiography authored in prison. I focus instead on these women as central purveyors of the crypto-Jewish faith in their family and within their crypto-Jewish community. Crypto-Judaism refers to those who secretly practice Judaism and publicly practice Catholicism. They were baptized, and hence why they were subject to the Inquisition. Where Judaism is a patriarchal religion, I argue that crypto-Judaism was matriarchal. Men were absent and often away for long periods of time. The only people entrusted with the faith for the next generation became women. Due to the absence of a stable patriarchy, many engaged in trade, and there was these very developed networks amongst the Portuguese nation, like Aaron Lopez here in Newport himself. The Sephardic diaspora encouraged a dominant matriarchy. The opportunities for matriarchy and the Carvajal's accommodation to inquisitorial persecution shaped the sisters' fervent Judaizing. And this is the first page from the trial. You can see it says the segundo proceso, or the second trial. It lists her name, that she was a relapsed Judaizer, and sets out what you will come to find in the rest of the book. So we continue to read in this trial how they lived, how Isabel and her sister lived a hybrid faith. In the following passage, I'm going to read how she would attend church on a regular basis to feign allegiance to the Republic of Spaniards, to the Christian Republic in which she lived in New Spain, today Mexico. The Carvajals, who had taken the sacraments of the Mother Church without any feeling, and although she didn't make fun of them and confess that she took communion, she did so only to obey the rules, but not because she believed in Jesus Christ was their author, nor did she believe him to be their God. And the altar she and her mother, Doña Francisca, sisters Doña Catalina, Mariana, Leonor, and Luis had in their home, was there only as to appear as Spanish subjects and not to be discovered, but not because they believed in the images or in the law of Jesus Christ. Esther became the patron saint of crypto-Judaism. Like the role that the Virgin Mary held for Christians, Esther provided hope and was considered a model and heroine for crypto-Jews. She was a female savior that could release the crypto-Jewish populace from their oppression. Esther was keenly significant because crypto-Jews were raised as public Catholics and private Jews. They embodied in their everyday practice and lives a dual and plural faith. As we have seen, crypto-Judaism is a hybrid faith that cannot be divorced from its constituent Catholic and Jewish influences. Figures such as Esther had power precisely because they resonated within both faiths. For the Carvajal women, Esther became Saint Esther in their private letters. She was also important because the centrality of the cult of Mary within the Catholic faith, and especially the importance of Mary at this time. So one final quote from the trial that I would like to share with you, and this has to do with Purim specifically, and Esther. Doña Isabel upheld the fast in contemplation of the fast of Queen Esther. In all the 3 days, she had not eaten even an egg with ash. And on Saturday, Doña Isabel would only break the fast because it was a holiday. And then she would begin again at Sunday at midday. Doña Isabel brought a discipline or auxiliary and she would strike herself every day, and then fast to observe the said law of Moses, later confessing that she had not done as much penitence as she had hoped due to health concerns, but assured that she would follow what she had promised God. This penitentiary context reveals a more Catholic practice, including flagellation and fasting. They contrast with the overt practices of normative Judaism because they were not visible. One could not easily celebrate Purim with a carnival, with a feast and a party, but interior practices, such as the fast of Esther, were primary. In this way, the body is a female-controlled space that stood out in its defiance of patriarchal Catholic order. Unlike in the tapestries that left out the fast of Esther and instead showed many celebratory banquets, here the fast of Esther stands out as a centrally important practice. For women like the Carvajal sisters, Esther became the head of a new type of religiosity, a matriarchal, female-led practice within their homes and using their own bodies. They bled for her with hair shirts, they fasted for her, but above all, they looked to her for guidance at a time when more and more of their endangered cultural heritage was in their hands. And I would just like to conclude with a few broader conclusions from my work. Esther is a cultural chameleon who survived by passing and triumphs by coming out. In this way, she seems a more modern figure than one would expect, as does her surprisingly global context in the Jewish diaspora. She's an early modern globetrotter and border transgressor. Sephardic identity exists beyond geographical borders and contests the pure physical boundaries of a national identity. And Sephardic comes from the Hebrew word for Spain, which was Sepharda. If you take a look at this map, this is following the trajectory of Isabel de Carvajal from Portugal to New Spain, looking into the other texts that I work with in my book that take place in Amsterdam, within the Iberia, in Flanders, all these different places the Sephardic Jews were involved in the slave trade in Africa and to the New World, different parts of South America, North America. These are really global people and more modern than we would think. They were mobile and global. They had multiple loyalties. They were Jewish and Christians, and their practices became mixed because of these double and multiple lives. The Esther story continues to be a crucial story for the Jewish people. Every year, many little girls, and myself included, so I'm going to just share this picture. That's me. Throughout the world don Esther costumes. Like the early modern women who saw public models of royalty in Isabella Católica and Catholic models of saints, nuns, and the Virgin Mary, Esther was their alternative, their Jewish queen and heroine that they aspired to be like, both in their physical beauty and in her interior strength. Like Esther, they aspire to resist adversity, survive, and flourish. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions through the chat.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was fascinating. And yes, Esther is an amazing figure of history, of some lore, and she has many, many fans and followers. And so interesting to hear about how she was adopted during this period of the Inquisition. We invite questions and comments from the audience. You can put them in the chat and direct them to me. If they're not directed to me, I'll try to find them anyway, and we'll pass them on to Emily. While folks are gathering their thoughts, I was hoping you could say, first of all, I was so struck by the gorgeous tapestries and the manuscripts you were able to find. So can you tell us more about first those visual representations of the story of Esther, and then maybe secondly, tell us about your research and more of the documentation that you found.
Yeah, so these the tapestries, I knew that they existed. I didn't know that they were as large as they were. as they were so on public display. And they were just so, like, the pictures don't really do them justice of how detailed they are and the amount of work and the years. And I think it was something like 35 people at one time would be working on it, because these are, they're like 20 feet by 10 feet. And so just the amount of labor, and the many tapestries were commissioned. And these, I think, were amongst those. And so there was definitely an audience for them, but it was very exciting to be able to kind of read through the tapestries as this visual type of text, but also think about the materiality of, there's, with tapestries, as I've come to understand, there's the front that has a type of, the way you create them is overlaid with a different, there's like two different words, as I'm not remembering, but how you actually construct them and just the labor that went into them. So it was, and the fact that they are on display in a museum now for visitors, but that they were always been on display out, and to think about they were on the walls of the cathedral is something to me that seems really exciting, that they were always meant to be on view. And then the Inquisition manuscripts themselves are just these really, a lot of Inquisition manuscripts will have like folio, so a few pages here and there, but this is a really complete manuscript that just is full. It's just the entire testimony. And so it really paints a picture, and holding them is a really amazing thing, that you get to just hold these in your hands.
And you showed us the notes that the two sisters passed each other on, it sounds like anything they could get their hands on.
Yeah, these are little
Amazing.
scraps of paper, and it was encouraged because, and they did what they could. They hid it in plain sight in a way, and it was encouraged because they were evidence, and to be able to, have these notes that passed down to us all these years later, and the way people connected with each other. They were in jail cells in the Inquisition. They were subject to torture. I mean, it's not a pretty story. And this is their second trial. So they had been there before. They were told to reform, and they didn't. And so they're back. But they also want to connect. So yeah, there's a real, there's, to think about how that we can see in the last, of the last page of the trial, actually her own signature. And so the role that they played, and that these were literate women and very involved in their religiosity. Yeah.
We have a comment from Judith, who says, I have worked with Portuguese crypto Jews as an ethnomusicologist for the past 30 years. Excuse me. She's done field work, stayed in their homes, watched their children grow up to become leaders or emigrate, and more recently done some work with crypto Jews in Brazil. So maybe we can connect the two of you.
Yeah, that would be great.
And there is a question from Mark. Is it possible that the striking in the last passage was the pounding of the chest during the Vidu confessional that is said during penitential prayers on fast days, rather than flagellation?
It is possible. There are other references in the trial of flagellation that they would do at different times throughout their practice. But yes, that is definitely possible. But they also talk about the hair shirts that they would wear, and they would spend the day in these hair shirts. And so there is this kind of a very penitential context that emerges, because there were overt practices of their religion. There was no temples, there was no spaces they could go to. So everything was very interior. So, but that is an interesting connection as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I love that you said that Esther became the patron saint, well, the patron saint of crypto Jews, but it also sounds very much like the patron saint of women. That's part of your thesis, and that's so striking in what is, and certainly was at the time a patriarchal society. I mean, Judaism was a very patriarchal sort of tradition and structure system, and so for there to be this kind of this blossoming of a matriarchal sort of subculture is just fascinating to me. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was created by this context that many of the men, well, first this public versus private context, that the public spaces were outlawed and they were so everything happened within the home. I am doing some research right now about of the Mallorca community and the islands off the Balearic Islands off of the coast of Barcelona. And in that community, they actually used one of their gardens as the main place to pray, but it was the home. And in other space, and so there was that for women. And so some of their practices didn't have to change, but they had to become covert in a way. In a place like New Spain, there were servants who could observe things and they could report back to the Inquisition. So they did have to be careful about how they observed Shabbat and how they cleaned. The other parts of the trial talk about how they had cleaned the sheets before Shabbat, and how they would prepare certain foods and not eat others. And so everything was suspect, but these are really female spaces. The other piece is that many of the men were gone for really long periods of time. The Sephardic trade networks were really huge. And so they couldn't, there was just, the men were away while their women were home. And so there was both of these pieces that were significant for this. Yeah, but I think the fact that this dominant matriarchy and looking for female figures that they'd seen in their lives as both as Jewish women, but then as women who were part of a dominant Catholic culture, seeing the Virgin Mary, seeing Queen Isabel, and they adapted her, and so the Saint Esther is, a direct translation of what they would be seeing all the time. And they were, of course, going to church, and so these were things that were really bouncing around for them.
And we have a sort of related question. How much did the Inquisition target women rather than men for their secret practices?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's definitely more majority women. The targeting, so people basically were reported by their own, the testimony of their own family members. And we tend to think, oh, that's horrible that you could do that. But, these are people, they're under torture, they're under duress, they've been there for many times, and they start out by not saying anything, and then eventually they reveal different things. And so we do know that there's more women than men brought up under inquisitorial trials. And they feature prominently throughout Iberia, in the Latin America, because there's inquisitions in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, New Spain, all reporting back to the home office in Sevilla. So there was definitely, it's true. There was definitely more women, which kind of, and the women were primary transmitters of the faith as well. And they knew what was going on. And in other trials that I'm working with now, it talks about how women transmitted their faith, or they taught the faith, and their kids drank it in their breast milk. And that was another way that it was passed down. So there is this kind of bodily resonance that happens.
Fascinating. And did Esther, as this sort of, heroine, or, the patron saint, did she sort of go with them as they kind of, as the diaspora spread, as they traveled away? Did she continue to become a really revered figure for that?
Yeah, she's in different communities. So the longest surviving community that continued these secret practices when others was this Belmonte community in northern Portugal, and the Mallorcan Chuetas, who were this kind of more isolated group and intermarried up until the 20th century. And all of them, all throughout, they feature Esther as their patron saint and as this really important figure. And so she's something that is consistent throughout these different communities. Yeah.
Terrific. Is there anything that you can share with us about your current research, perhaps related to or coming out of this study? Or is it, you mentioned the sort of the study of, women and bodies and so on, which I know is sort of a more recent focus.
Yeah. So a lot of the work is about how women transmit what is purity or impurity at this time. And so I have moved it along. Of course, Esther was not a mother, and Isabel de Carvajal was a widow and she didn't have any children. And so that's something, and it gave her more power. And widows at this time did have more power because they were in charge of things like their husband's wills and their household. So the fact that she wasn't a mother was important. But now I've moved to this idea of where I do see examples of breast milk transmitting the Jewish faith and what that means for the crypto Jews themselves and what that means for the inquisitors. Is there's kind of this double, not a double standard, but it operated on both sides. So for the Jewish women, it became, this is how I transmit my faith, but it's also something negative for the inquisitors. And so I've been thinking a lot about that and just other types of maternal practices that I see in the trials, and specifically thinking more about these Mallorcan cases, because they just have these were people that up until the 20th century were intermarrying and were discriminated against and were known as kind of these people with Jewish backgrounds. And it was where in a lot of places Jewish practices started to happen piecemeal. Like people would have a special knife that they used that showed that they had this converso background, but a full set of practices didn't happen in the same way. And so the converso community, the Chuetas of Mallorca, is an interesting case for me. And it has informed just the research I've been doing thinking a lot about what breast milk meant and how it was and how practices surrounding wet nurses and in the early modern period in Spain, nursing from a Jewish or Muslim wet nurse was outlawed for Christians. But it happened because you needed to use those people who were around you. And so what do those legal trials look like? What are the cases against them? There were some contractually obligated women at different times for different things. And so looking into all these different pieces is what I've been working on recently.
Just fascinating. Well, we look forward to your further work, and thank you so much for sharing history, biblical history, religion, pathways, gender. There's so many rich themes and threads in your talk tonight, and we're grateful to you. And if anyone has further questions, we can direct them to Emily after this talk. So thank you so much, Emily Colbert-Cairns. And I want to thank you as well for your work as chair of the Education Committee of the Touro Synagogue Foundation. I also want to thank our tech producer, Emily Grigori, whom you heard a little bit earlier, and acknowledge the Board of Trustees and Touro Synagogue Foundation. And lastly, I want to thank all of you in the audience for your support of this series and the important work of the foundation. We look forward to seeing you again on May 9th for the second program on the Judah Touro program series. You can visit tourosynagogue.org to learn more. So to those of you celebrating this weekend, I wish you a happy Purim, and to everyone in our presentation tonight. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great evening, and goodbye for now.